the President of Poland, Andrzej Duda, has decided that he will veto 2 of the 3 bills that had been passed through the Polish parliament by the Law and Justice Party that would have reformed the judiciary, including purging the entirety of the Supreme Court with the exception of judges that could have received a waiver. Now, it should be pointed out that Duda, in his presidential bid, had been supported by the Law and Justice Party. The fact that he has struck down 2 of their bills is a fairly significant political development. Now, the President of Poland is supposed to be independent of the political parties, nonpartisan, a moderator. We have the same kind of thing in Romania. In many cases, they turn out not to be, but, that's the idea. And I very much welcome the move that Duda has taken, even though he is opposing his own political party, or the party that strongly supported him in his own presidential bid, because, look, Donald Tusk is a scumbag. We all know he's a scumbag. Anyone who's followed European politics knows what kind of piece of shit that guy is, and what his party had done, the civic, the civic platform. But the solution to the issues, the issues that were created by Tusk in the Polish judiciary, it's never to purge the highest court in the land because you disagree with what the previous party did. You're just making things worse, a lot worse. Judicial reform, that's something a lot of Poles support. I get that. But again, this was politicizing the courts even more than they already were, and going back in a way to the communist era, when the courts were puppets of the government and the whole system was a farce. Mind you, the court system in a lot of Eastern European countries is a farce, as is, but you're just going back to the communist era with these kind of changes. So the actions taken by President Duda, very much welcome, very much appreciated. He didn't veto all of the bills, but he did veto the most important one in my mind, which is the purging of the Supreme Court. Now, from the Financial Times, Duda's defiance leads Poland into new territory. Few allies of Kaczynski have defied the combative ideologue who heads Poland's ruling Law and Justice Party and casts a long shadow over the country's political scene. Andrzej Duda, the Polish president, is now one of the exceptions. On Monday, Mr. Duda, who as president is legally nonpartisan but was backed by Law and Justice during his 2015 election campaign, said he would veto 2 bills put forward by the PIS, which critics fear would undermine the independence of the judiciary, which they would, along with third draft law also aimed at increasing political control of the judiciary. The bills have sparked 8 days of protest across Poland and drawn mounting criticism from the European Union and other key Polish allies such as the United States. I haven't heard much of United States criticism, but maybe that's because the US media is obsessed over Trump, Russia, sanctions, all that. Anyway, but despite the uproar, few observers expected Mr. Duda, the son of 2 professors who himself studied law in Krakow, to oppose the bills, which were a key plank of Mr. Kaczynski's agenda. Mr. Kaczynski holds no government post, but founded his party and is regarded as by far the country's most influential politician. It's a huge blow for Kaczynski, who values loyalty above else. He has operated all along on the assumption that Duda is dependent on him, and Duda's move has very publicly shown that this is no longer the case. The civic platform takes a similar line. The most important thing is that for the first time the president has stood up against his political family. Previously his moves were half-hearted, but today he really showed that he can think independently. Duda's move, although it does not meet all our demands, opens up all sorts of possibilities. Let's hope the president will stand firm. The trio of bills at the heart of the standoff were pushed through parliament by the PIS lawmakers in the last 2 weeks. One would give politicians control over the National Judicial Council, the body that appoints judges. Another would force all Supreme Court judges to step down, except those kept on by the president, acting on the proposal of the justice minister. And the third would allow the justice minister to fire the heads of lower courts. Mr. Duda said he had made his decision to veto the first 2 of these bills after talking over the weekend with a dissident who had been operating against the communist regime during the 1970s and 80s. She warned him that the bills would concentrate too much power in the hand of the justice minister, who also functions as the prosecutor general. he explained on Monday. Like she said, Mr. President, I lived in a country where the prosecutor general had an unbelievably strong position and could do anything. I don't want to go back to such a country, Mr. Duda recalled during televised address to explain his decision. Others sent more than a whiff of political calculation for Mr. Duda. I think he judged that if he wants to have a chance as a second term, the risk stemming from alienating the center who are protesting on the streets would outweigh the fallout from losing the party's nomination. There's also been mounting pressure from Brussels. Donald Tusk, the European Council president and a former Polish prime minister, has said the reforms are a denial of European values, while the European Commission last week warned that it could ask other European Union member states to issue an official warning to Warsaw if it did not back down. This may have also played a role in the president's calculations. I think part of the reason is that they realized that the European Union was really serious. They understood that there was intense pressure on the Commission to take action. What happens next depends on a range of actors. The Commission had been expected to take action against Poland when it meets on Wednesday, but uncertainty over Mr. Duda's intervention may prompt it to wait longer before taking decisive action. With German elections due in September, 2 months hiatus would go down well in Berlin, where Merkel would certainly not want to deal with this affair at the moment. Although Mr. Duda made clear he is in favor of some form of legal reform, and the third bill, which he chose not to veto, is also seen as controversial in Brussels. The other big question is how the Polish government will react. Mr. Duda's veto can still be overruled by Parliament if the Law and Justice Party is able to rally enough support from other parties to give it a 3/5 majority. If you look at the polls, the majority of the population wants some form of judicial reform. But the big question is how the PIS responds. Will they accuse Duda of betraying them, or will they accept the need for changes and come up with a new resolution? Well, that certainly will be interesting to see how it plays out. I got a comment on the issue of the European Union. Europe, shut the fuck up. Like, legitimately, if the European Commission sees itself as the ruler of Europe who can impose its will on the rest of the European Union, they're in for a rude awakening if they try and strong-arm Poland over this particular issue. Now, look, it is very concerning, but at the same time, the European Commission is one of the last ruling bodies that should weigh on this. The European Court of Justice, the European Court of Human Rights, different affair. The European Commission, with its corruption, with its censorship, with its moves against democracy, they're the one to talk about these kind of issues? No, I don't think so. I don't think they have a leg to stand on, and I think they should keep their bloody mouths shut on this particular issue. And then there's Merkel. Of course, Merkel doesn't want any political scandal because good old Angela Merkel is a political bitch in the literal sense, as in she'll go wherever she thinks she'll get the most approval. That's how she's been a politician her entire bloody life. She'll do whatever is popular. You know, it's funny always seeing someone accuse Trump of populism, and Merkel isn't. You know, Merkel, who has always changed her stance depending on the mood of the German population. Hell, she's even changed her stance on immigration because of the mood of the German population. And, you know, on the issue of Poland, certainly some people would care. Now, could the European Union actually do anything against Poland? No. And the reason is because of Viktor Orban in Hungary, who would probably veto such proposals. And really on this issue, as many other issues, there's great tensions between Western Europe, Eastern Europe, Northern Europe, Southern Europe. Those tensions will only increase if you have the European Commission in Brussels interfere, if you have Western Europe intervene in this kind of affair. I mean, it's a fairly serious issue that they try to purge their Supreme Court in their country, but the response that is not, you know, finger pointing by the West, because they don't really have a leg to stand on for most people, and would really only backfire for them. Now, what will happen in the future? What kind of, you know, how all of this will end going? It's hard to say. I should point out, though, for people talking about how the Law and Justice Party is struggling, because there are people that do make this argument, the Law and Justice Party, despite all of these scandals, despite the protests, is still leading the polls in the next parliamentary election in Poland. So, obviously it does benefit the president politically to an extent that he did something like this, but at the same time, I would urge people that are looking at the protests occurring to not get too much tunnel vision. Because it's the same kind of mentality that people have when it comes to, say, Trump in the United States, where it's like, oh, there's these massive protests and street marches. Yeah, with the vast majority of people that are showing up at these protests being people that voted against them. If Trump lost his supporters, that would be a different affair. Hell, in Romania, in my own country, we had, over the first few months of the year, we had over 600,000 people on the streets. The vast majority of the people that went on the streets had voted against the current government, and the people that were on the streets were against the proposal that the current government wished to make. It blew up in their face. It didn't go so well for them politically. But again, one shouldn't assume the popularity of a government or their position in the polls or how well they do electorally based on how many people are in the streets in places that they don't do so well in to begin with. Costin here on Serious Gaming signing out. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video. Thank you all for watching, and if you like my political content, consider supporting me via PayPal or Patreon.